System, what form this time? Azure Dragon or Qilin? I asked coldly in the dark. As the savior who had crossed through the apocalypse 98 times, I was already used to that life and death power. But the system didn't answer. I snapped my eyes open, and instead of bleak ruins, saw a black and white paw. I instinctively tried to touch my face, but the soft round feel made me freeze. I looked down. A plump belly, short, stubby limbs. Conrad Inc. A cold, rational professional savior had turned into a giant panda. Damn. I opened my mouth, but what came out was a soft eep. Before I recovered from my shattered worldview, a bloody wind hit me. 3 giant wolves with steel fangs, built like bulls and glowing green eyes, closed in from the ruins. At their feet, a girl in combat gear pulled the trigger on a jammed pistol. That was Ivy Sue. I knew her. She was the last hope in this mutant planet apocalypse. One wolf lunged at the girl's throat, roaring. I tried to block it with flash step, but my body was too heavy, and I dropped onto my butt. The momentum bounced me out like a ball, and I slammed into the lead wolf. The other 2 froze. Not used to seeing a round little creature, I steadied and dusted off my butt. If I couldn't change back, fine, let's fight. The giant wolf lunged again. Eyes turned cold, and I swung back with a bare paw. Smack! With a sharp crack, the beast that could tear an armored truck apart was sent flying dozens of meters, slammed into a concrete wall. Suyi stood stunned. Her hands shook as she raised her gun at me, voice trembling. Are you a mutant? I ignored her. I walked to a shaky metal street lamp by the road. I was starving. This creature's metabolism was insanely fast. I yanked the aluminum lamp post, as thick as a baby's arm. Under Suya's stare, I bent it like a cracker. Snapped off a piece and put it in my mouth. Nice and crisp, with a faint rusty flavor. Tasty. I kept chewing, when the ground beneath my feet suddenly started shaking violently. Countless thick purple-black vines burst out of the cracks, coiling around Suya's ankles like venomous snakes and dragging her toward the abyss below. Help! Suya's scream ripped through the air. The vines were covered in barbs and instantly pierced her body armor. I frowned. I pride myself on staying calm and rational, but the mission hadn't started yet. The guy couldn't die. I tossed aside the half-street lamp and dropped to all fours, charging forward like a black and white heavy tank. Mutant vine sensed the threat and sent more than a dozen tendrils to stab at me. This toxin can paralyze an elephant in an instant, but my thick fur seems to be a natural insulator. I sank my teeth into the main vine wrapped around Sylvia. Crack! The main vine. Crack! The main vine. Crack! The main vine. Crack! A mutant vine strong enough to crush. I chewed the bitter juice while ripping apart the remaining tendrils with my paws. Sylvia dropped to the ground, gasping for air. She looked at me, her eyes shifting from fear to confusion. You protected me? I couldn't bother to answer. Talking in this form was too hard. I turned away from her. Then I swaggered forward. You can't go that way. Wait! Ignoring her injuries, Sylvia stumbled after me. The hunting ground in the city center. It's full of man-eating flowers. I stopped and looked back at her. My eyes said one thing. Telling me what to do? Sylvia froze under my cold stare, or what I thought was one. Then she gritted her teeth and pulled a dusty red apple from her backpack. She held it out to me. Eat this. Stop eating streetlights, it's bad for you. Looking at the apple, I hesitated 0.1 seconds. As the savior, I shouldn't accept gifts from the person I was to protect, but this body's drool was already out of control. I reached out and took the apple like a priceless treasure. The moment I bit into it, sweet juice burst across my mouth. In that instant, I felt like my soul was healed, but the warmth lasted less than 3 seconds. Before I knew it, the ruins all around us were packed with mutant monkeys. They clutched corrosive pus sacs, staring at us like predators. Suyi went pale. We're done, zombie monkeys. Too many of them. I swallowed the last bite of apple and chewed up the core too. I slowly straightened up. Am I fat? Maybe. But they don't know this palm hits with 3,000 pounds of force. The monkey horde moved. Green pus sacs came crashing down like rain. Suyi raised his folding shield and curled up behind me in despair. I took a deep breath and tucked myself into a perfect ball. System. Activate defense boost. Command confirmed. Current form, meatball tank. Roll down the slope like a giant black and white bowling ball. Those corrosive fluids splashed onto my fur, and besides making it look a little shinier, they did nothing. Boom! I smashed through an abandoned guard booth and crushed more than a dozen zombie monkeys into pulp. I picked up speed, bouncing back and forth through the narrow streets, every impact followed by the sound of bones shattering. Suyi stared in shock at that round figure rampaging through the ruins. What should have been a deadly siege, I turned into a cleanup game. By the time I stopped, not a single mutant creature was left alive. I shook my dizzy head and was about to call Iris to keep moving, when I saw her staring hard at something behind me. In the overlapping shadows of the ruins, a huge black flower bud was slowly opening, and its rich sweet scent instantly flooded the whole street. It's a young corpse incense konjac, Iris cried. Hold your breath, the scent is highly toxic. I took a sniff. Yeah, definitely sweet, but this panda body seemed oddly resistant. Not only did I not pass out, I thought the glowing energy core in the center of that bud looked really tasty. As I was about to go over for a snack, the roar of engines came from the distance. A convoy of armed jeeps broke through the fog and stopped nearby. Dozens of soldiers in advanced exoskeleton suits jumped out, and black gun barrels aimed at me and Iris. S-Class mutant lifeform confirmed. Designation 001, Panda form, suspected high intelligence. Prepare for capture. Scar-faced leader spoke coldly. There was no room for negotiation. I glanced at so-called fellow humans. In this world, humans were even crueler than mutant plants. The scar-faced man gave a cold laugh and pulled the trigger. A tranquilizer steel dart coated with enough sedative to down a whale. I didn't even look. I casually reached out and caught the dart neatly in my paw. Then, in front of them, I stuffed that special steel dart into my mouth and bit it in half with a crunch. A dead silence fell. Fire! Open fire! The scar-faced man was scared by the way I crushed the steel needle, and screamed. Rat-a-tat-tat. The heavy machine gun roared. Sui rushed over to shield me, but I shoved her behind me. I couldn't be bothered to dodge. Bullets of this caliber hitting my fur felt like a forced deep tissue massage. The rounds warped and dropped one after another, piling up in a thick layer on the ground. I was getting annoyed. I slammed my foot down, and my body turned into a blur as I charged to the jeep. Before the scar-faced man could react, I grabbed the machine gun barrel with one hand. Under everyone's horrified gaze, I put strength into both arms and twisted that red-hot alloy barrel as if I were wringing a noodle, twisting it into a knot. I gave the scar-faced man what I thought was an imposing smile, but to him it was pure terror. HM, that's it? He collapsed to the ground in fright, and the smell of piss spread through the air. That's it? He collapsed to the ground in fright. Monster, it's a monster wearing panda skin. Stop! Monster! Stop! A monster wearing panda skin. Monster! Stop! Shouting at the soldiers, it saved me. It's a guardian spirit, not a mutant beast. The soldiers looked at each other. A mutant beast that saves people? In the apocalypse, that was pure fantasy. Just then, an old but commanding voice came over the radio. Bring them back. I want to meet that god myself. The soldiers lowered their guns. Sui breathed in relief and turned to look at me with worry. But I searched the jeep's trunk with my head down. At last, I found a huge bundle of high-grade steel bars for reinforcing fortifications. I picked up the bundle like it was a stack of fine young bamboo and walked toward the back seat, casually chewing on it. Since you're treating me, then I won't hold back. The convoy drove into a massive steel fortress, Dawn Base. It was only survivor stronghold within 500 miles. The moment we entered the base, thousands of civilians pressed against the quarantine windows, staring at me in dead silence. A little girl clutching a ragged panda doll timidly lifted a finger, pointed at me, then pointed at the doll in her hand. I stopped chewing the steel bar and, for some reason, gave her a little wave. The whole place erupted. But just then, a shrill alarm rang out from deep inside the base, more urgent than any disaster warning I'd ever heard. Warning! The underground root system has broken through Defense Line 3. The corpse flower mother plant has awakened. The ground heaved, and a massive crack split open in the center of the base. A blood-red flower bud big enough to blot out the sky was rising from underground. The base instantly turned into hell. Screams, sobs, and the crash of collapsing buildings blended into one. The corpse flower mother plant was too huge, just one single bud. It took up half a football field. A dark red toxic mist began spreading. The soldiers who seemed unstoppable moments ago only had to breathe once, and their skin began rotting instantly, clutching their throats in agony. Gas masks are useless. It's a nerd agent, the scar-faced man shouted in terror. Sui grabbed me and tried pulling me toward the exit, but I didn't move. I stared at the gorgeous, deadly flower. To me, it wasn't some world-ending demon at all, but a giant, richly scented, super dessert. I stepped forward against the panicked crowd fleeing for their lives and headed for the giant flower. What are you doing? Get back here. Sui was frantic. I didn't look back. Since it was the mission target, I finished it at once. I walked beneath the devil's tongue plant. Fang vines lashed at me like whips. I grabbed one, gave it a yank, and stuffed it into my mouth. The juice was bitter, but packed with energy. Like a humanoid bear-shaped harvester, I kept walking, while swallowing every vine that attacked me. Everyone at the base was dumbfounded. That arrogant monster, nearly wiping out the entire human base, was being eaten like a snack by a panda. System alert, high energy nutrients absorbed. Host energy reserves at 100%. Begin phase 2? I stared at the center of the flower about to bloom. Wrapped inside was a blood-red crystal. That was the source of this world's disaster. Activate, I said mentally. In an instant, a terrifying pressure burst out of my body. My round, huge shape began to twist and stretch. Golden flames lit up in my eyes. It's glowing, the little girl cried, under everyone's trembling gaze. My body, over 3 feet tall, 12 to 30 feet, 60 feet. A golden phantom formed behind me, the outline of a giant towering into the sky. While I stood on the phantom's brow, it was a miracle. The Amorphophallus mother seemed to sense threat of death, and its bud trembled wildly, releasing purple-black lightning. Expressionless, I raised a golden bear paw toward the giant flower below, and slammed it down hard. Get down! Boom! The base shook. With that one strike, it wasn't just the giant flower. The ground within a 300-foot radius was crushed 3 yards deep. The shockwave cleared away the poisonous fog around us. The once gorgeous, arrogant corpse fragrance Amorphophallus now looked like a rotten cabbage that had been stomped flat, crooked and half buried in the crater. The crystal inside shattered from that slap. Everyone was speechless. The scar-faced man's gun slipped and hit the ground. Sui collapsed in the ruins, looking up at the towering golden figure. I could feel my power draining fast. This kind of skill that forcibly crosses dimensions was too much for my body now. The golden figure faded away. I turned back into a black and white ball, slumping weakly by the crater's edge. The once arrogant mother host withered completely, and the poisonous vines spreading through the city shriveled up and crumbled with it. For the first time, a trace of light broke through the apocalyptic sky. "A hero, our hero," someone shouted. The survivors rushed toward me. They were no longer afraid, only filled with the wild joy of surviving. Sui was the first to reach me. She wanted to hold me, but was afraid of hurting me in my weak state. With red eyes, she only pulled out the last apple she had saved from her arms. Thank you. I took the apple with effort and bit into it. Damn, I was exhausted. I wanted to smile at her, but my vision was starting to blur. The system voice rang coldly in head, warning, energy critically depleted. Past life memories will soon be forcibly sealed. Physical collapse countdown, 60 seconds. My heart jolted. Collapse? Wasn't this supposed to be just transmigration? Right then, I felt a sharp pain in my ear. A tiny mechanical parasite, nearly impossible to see with the naked eye, crawled out from the ruins and took advantage of my weakness. It bored into my ear canal. Bzzz, my brain erupted in electromagnetic static. The world became dark red gibberish. Bloodlust, rage, and destruction flooded over me like a tidal wave. Sui noticed something was wrong and backed away in horror. Your eyes, why did they turn red? I let out a pained roar. It was no longer a soft little whimper, but a beast king's true roar, strong enough to shake earth. My claws moved toward Sui. Shoot! It's out of control, one of the base commanders screamed through the loudspeaker. The soldiers raised their guns again, but this time, every single hand was shaking. Sui didn't move. She stared into my blood-red eyes, even though my claws had cut the skin on her neck and blood was forming. Are you Chen Imo? She whispered. It was the name on the background board in Unit 1, of the man who had saved her before. At that moment, the command to destroy clashed violently. The mechanical parasite churned wildly in my brain, trying to seize control of this powerful body. But Chen Imo, Savior 98 times, had never been controlled. Get out. I let out a furious roar that only I could hear. With the last of my strength, it force-started the emergency ejection protocol. Anomalous parasite detected. Emergency purge initiated. World transfer begun. A blinding white light from sky to earth swallowed me in an instant. Sui reached for me, but all she caught was a fading speck of light. At the center of white light, I saw her kneeling, crying her heart out. And above the ruins of the base, little girl held up her panda doll and bowed deeply toward where the pillar of light had vanished. The white light before me grew brighter, and my consciousness slowly sank into darkness. When I felt wet and cold again, the sound in my ears was no longer explosions, but the gentle wash of ocean waves. I forced eyes open, and sunlight stabbed at them. I tried to lift my thick bare paw, but found my hand had become light, soft, and floppy. I looked down. The black and white fur was gone, replaced by short, wet brown fur. I was floating on my back in a boundless ocean, and my two little paws were instinctively rubbing over my belly. System. Get out here and explain this. I stared at the reflection of a sea otter that just rubs its face and looks so weak I could kill 3 with one punch. And fell into thought. Current world, deep blue lost pearl. Catastrophe type, global flood. Host form, sea otter. Just then, a huge shadow swept beneath water. A mutated great white shark, over 5 meters, lunged up from below me, jaws wide open. I was numb. 1 second I was the iron-eating beast that defeated an S-class monster, and the next I was a sea otter too tiny to even fill a shark's teeth. Those blade-like teeth were in my face. Instinctively, I felt around my belly, inside the empty fold of skin. There was a rock, a sea otter's tool for cracking shells, but in my hands, Calvin Ink turned it into an armor-piercing weapon. When the shark snapped its jaws shut, I twisted in the water. A sea otter's hydrodynamic genes are better than a panda's. I slipped past the shark's face like a muddy eel. Bang! I grabbed the rock, poured in the last of system energy, and smashed it against the shark's weakest spot, tip of its nose. The great white was stunned. It probably never imagined in its life that this little cute thing could hit that hard. While it reeled in pain, I flipped onto its back and clung tight to its fin with my tiny paws. Eek! Get off me! I shouted while swinging the rock. The shark rolled across the surface, sending water flying. Finally, it couldn't take dimensional smackdown anymore and fled toward the deep sea, tail thrashing. I floated on the surface, gasping hard. My paws started rubbing my face on instinct. Otter instinct keeps the fur waterproof. Inside, I was falling apart. Outside, I was adorable. Just then, a faint cry for help came from far away. On a broken floating plank sat a little girl, maybe 6 or 7. She was soaked through, clutching a violin with broken strings. And behind her, Starving mutant piranhas were leaping out of the water, closing in like the Grim Reaper, wanted to swim away. In a dungeon like this, the worst thing you can do at the start is meddle. But the little girl looked up at the sky, shut her eyes in despair, and murmured, "God, if you're up there, please save Amon." Suddenly, I saw that little girl at the base, hugging a panda doll. Damn it. I stuffed the stone back into the fold of skin on my belly and dove underwater. If a god, then I'll damn well show you one. The piranhas were just about to enjoy their feast. The one in front had just lunged for the girl's throat when a brown blur cut it off midair. I opened my mouth. And with an otter's teeth, cute looking, but with a brutal bite, I snapped its neck clean. Crack! Salty fish blood splashed over Amon's face. She opened her eyes and stared at me in a daze. I floated on the water, holding a fish bigger than me. She tilted her head. A sea otter? Amon rubbed her eyes in disbelief. I had no time to waste, over a dozen were still underwater. I was an aurora beneath the sea, weaving through the piranha pack again and again with the sea otter's fast spins. In less than 3 minutes, the deadly waters were covered with shattered chunks and grime. Dead fish were everywhere. I jumped onto the plank, then shook water off with a look of disgust. Amon reached out with trembling hands, wanting to touch me but afraid I'd bite. I flicked the fresh fish I just killed in front of her and tapped it with paw. Eek, eek, no talking. Amon understood. She'd been starting too long to care about appearances and grabbed the fish, stuffing into her mouth. As tears pattered onto the plank. Thank you, Mr. Sea Otter. I turned away coolly and looked out at the endless sea. This world was more hopeless than the panda world. There was no land. Humans lived on floating garbage islands or giant warships. Just then, Amon suddenly screamed. On the distant horizon, a black wall over 300 feet high was crashing toward us like the end of the world. That was a super tsunami. In front of a disaster like this little wooden plank didn't even count as an ant. And Amon suddenly grabbed my paw and shoved me hard into her arms. Mr. Sea Otter, run. You can swim, leave me behind. You're gonna live. You idiot girl actually wants me to run for my life? I looked at the world-ending wave, then into her clear eyes. Ethan Cross. You really owed these little girls in your last life. I tore myself out of her arms and stood straight at the edge of the plank. System. Unlock the forbidden skill Sea Otter form. Warning, host is currently weakened. Forced activation of Sea Tamer may permanently damage consciousness. Cut the crap. Do it! I roared inaudibly. By then, the 100-meter wave was upon us. Armand screamed and clung to the plank. I shut, waiting to die. I floated at the front of the wave, tiny paws raised overhead. Amid the earth-shaking roar, Armand heard a deep, magnetic, commanding male voice explode directly in her mind. Break apart. I broke apart. My body burst with dazzling blue light. Armand opened her eyes and saw the most incomprehensible scene of her life. That tiny sea otter, facing the black tsunami that blotted out the sky, didn't run. Instead, it made an unbelievably cute move. It rubbed its little face hard with both paws. With every rub, blue ripples spread from its body. The giant wave, powerful enough to swallow a city, the instant it struck those blue ripples. It was like hitting an invisible wall of steel, splitting the waves clean in two as they rushed past both sides of the plank. At the center of the storm, Armin and the plank were unharmed, without a drop on them, and stood on the crest of the wave, my golden eyes looking down at the sea. Then the tsunami faded. I turned back into an exhausted sea otter and flopped onto the plank. Armin rushed over and grabbed me. Mr. Otter. Mr. Otter, wake up! I forced my eyes open a crack. In the distance, a massive fleet was sailing this way. A huge flag flew over the flagship, bearing a. I froze. It was a panda. The civilization I saved myself in the first world had somehow become humanity's spiritual symbol in this world. Just then, a stern female voice came through the fleet's loudspeaker. It even sounded a little like Sui. Life signs detected ahead. Is that the divine beast sea otter from the codex? Hurry! That's the divine beast from the codex. Save it at any cost. I wanted to laugh, but I had no strength. Sui, is that you? Or is this reincarnation crossing time and space? My eyes closed, and consciousness fell into darkness again, just before I completely passed out. The system gave a final chime. Congratulations, host. Main quest bestiary of all beasts unlocked. Current world's faith value, surging. I was taken aboard a massive battleship called the Dawn. When I opened my eyes, I saw not a fancy cabin, but a large flag on the wall, with a panda chewing on a streetlight on it. I was a little dazed, and something complicated stirred inside me. Looks like Sui didn't lie to me. She did carry my image on. It's awake! A man cried out in surprise by the bedside. Then came a burst of hurried footsteps. A woman in a sharp military uniform walked in, and she looked strikingly like Sui. She was Su Qing, commander of this search fleet. When she looked at me, there was none of that flippant pet owner gaze. Instead, her eyes held an almost fanatical reverence. Our records say the gods once came in many forms. The panda was the first. Su Qing knelt before me, voice shaking. Are you the second one, Mr. Sea Otter? I said nothing, only turned away coldly. Habitually, I rested my paw on my belly. In this form, even nodding would look ridiculous. But then I noticed the ship's power system was letting out a heavy roar, a sign of overload. I pushed myself up and pointed below the deck. Su-Ching froze for a second, then caught on. Something wrong in the engine room? I jumped off the bed and waddled toward it. An otter's body is clumsy on land, but I don't need grace. I just need to find that failing valve. As the savior, fixing machines is what I do best. The engine room was thick with steam. Several engineers were sweating bullets, but none of them could do a thing with that rusty old purifier. This ship was facing a freshwater shortage. I pushed through the crowd and, ignoring Su-Ching's shocked stare, jumped straight onto the scalding pipes. An otter's paws may be furry, but its fingers are incredibly nimble. I pulled out my lucky stone from the fold of my skin, the one I always kept with me, and started tapping the jam pressure valve in a steady rhythm. Bang! Bang bang! Every hit cleared the airlock in the pipes with perfect precision. Under everyone's stunned gaze, the machine that had been shaking violently somehow settled down and ran smoothly. It's really fixing the machine, an old engineer said, rubbing his eyes. The wrench in his hand almost fell on his foot. Ignored all the gasps. I dusted off my paws and pointed at the purified water tank, showing it was safe to drink. Su-Ching stepped forward, scooped up clear water, and burst into tears. The panda god brought fire, and the otter god brought water, she murmured. Then she ordered the soldiers, seal off the news. Only core members are allowed to disturb the god's rest. I turned around, but my sense of danger only grew stronger. This form recovers energy way too slowly, and I can feel countless evil presences gathering beneath the sea. That garbled thing parasitizing brain is suppressed by the system, but the coordinates it left behind seem to draw this world's predators here. The calm didn't last long. On the evening of the third day, dozens of speedboats loaded with heavy weapons appeared on the horizon. It was the infamous Black Shark pirates. They specialized in hunting floating cities and stealing their resources. Commander Su. They used an EMP. Our weapons are down, the adjutant shouted in panic. The swarm of speedboats closed in like wolves, and grappling hooks latched onto the rails of the Dawn. Su-Ching drew her blade, eyes resolute. She knew that once the pirates boarded this battleship carrying thousands of civilians would turn into a living hell. Crouched at the top of the mast, I watched these fools. The savior isn't dead yet. Since when is your turn to run wild? I leapt down and plunged into the deep sea. Underwater, I am the absolute king. Like a deep-sea torpedo, I shot straight to bottoms of the pirate boats. A sea otter's teeth and rocks are the best dismantling tools. I bit through a speedboat's drive shaft with precision, then grabbed a rock and smashed it into the propeller. Boom! The first speedboat died instantly and, carried by momentum, slammed into its partner's hull. I did the same thing again. I shot through the water at high speed. To the pirates, all they saw were dark shapes flashing by, and their own boats started blowing up and sinking like they were cursed. Su-Ching watched it all from the deck. She couldn't see what was really happening, but she knew that furry figure was fighting for them. The pirates were driven back, but the real threat was just rising to the surface. When the last speedboat sank beneath the sea, the water did not grow calm. Instead, it fell into a strange, absolute silence. Then a massive whirlpool, over 300 feet across, formed beside the morning dawn. What is that? A man pointed at the water, voice shaking. A gigantic tentacle covered in suckers burst through the surface. It towered as high as skyscrapers. It was Leviathan, the ultimate mutant of this world, and a relative of the corpse bloom I killed back in Panda World. It had come because drawn by the leftover energy inside me. Next to it, the morning dawn looked like a toy. One of its tentacles slammed into the ship, and the steel hull twisted instantly. Su-Ching looked up in despair. A monster on this level was beyond ordinary people to fight. I rose out of the water and looked at the monster blotting out the sky. The sea otter's body was trembling. Not fear, but the thrill from an energy mismatch. System. Overdraw fate points from the next 10 stages to force a giant transformation. Warning, forcing it will make the host randomly lose one of the 5 senses in the upcoming instances. Proceed? Quick talking. Saving people comes first. Looked at Su-Ching on the deck, shielding A-Man, descendant of Sui. Cannot die in front of me. Blue light covered the sea once more. In the blinding white glow everyone watched, a colossal sea otter phantom rose between heaven and earth. It was no longer that tiny cutie only a few inches long. Blue lightning wrapped whole body, and its eyes shone like stars. Even the giant beast Leviathan looked a head shorter in front of it. I reached out with a massive claw and grabbed Leviathan's main tentacle. That slimy touch made my skin crawl. I spun and slammed it over my shoulder, smashing the deep-sea monster weighing tens of thousands of tons into the seabed. Ayo! It crashed into the seabed. Leviathan gave a painful howl and spewed black toxic mist. I didn't dodge. The phantom clapped its palms together. In that moment, A-Man saw a sight she would never forget. The giant sea otter was rubbing its face. But every rub triggered an electromagnetic storm over the thunder ran through seawater, scorching Leviathan. I seized the chance to jump onto its head and raise the gigantic divine stone I had conjured, launching the final blow at its core. It was the ultimate display of power and speed. Every strike sent out tsunami-like shockwaves. Every blow was tearing apart this world's darkness. Finally, Leviathan's core shattered, and it dropped heavily into the abyss, silent forever. I stood on the sea, the phantom slowly fading away. I felt the world slipping away from me, Su-Ching's shouts, Amen's cries. All of it was turning blurry. Teleportation starting. Side effect detected, the host will lose the ability of language perception in the next unit. I closed my eyes, and let the white light carry my mind away. Cold! A cold beyond reason. When I came to, there was no sound of waves by me, only the raging north wind. I tried to speak, but all that came out of my throat was a bleeding baw. I froze. I lowered my head and saw a thick, almost absurdly fluffy coat of pale golden wool. I had turned into a sheep, and the system had taken my hearing too. I couldn't hear the wind, couldn't hear the avalanche. The world had become a grand silent film. I walked through snow that rose past my knees. This was an apocalypse buried under endless permafrost. On the far horizon, I vaguely made out broken wooden huts with black smoke rising from them, then saw a group of people. They wore thin, tattered cotton coats, and huddled by a fire, eyes full of despair. An old man collapsed headfirst into the snow, having no strength left. Those beside him only stared blankly. No one could help him up. In this world, warmth was more precious than gold. I ran over. I burrowed into the old man's arms. This wool isn't just wool. It gives off a holy, steady warmth and seems to glow. The old man's bluish face softened the moment he touched me, like a miracle. With trembling hands, he reached out and stroked me. His lips moved. I couldn't hear him, but I could read his lips. He was saying, "The gods haven't abandoned us." The old man survived. He held me like I was the only thing keeping him alive. The survivors by the fire gathered around. To their amazement, as long as they came within 10 feet of me, the cold that could freeze your bones simply vanished. A burly man carrying a shotgun walked over, and there was a frightening greed in his eyes when he looked at me. I could read that mouth shape too, lamb and sheepskin. He raised the gun. I didn't move. I just stared at him coldly. In this instance, I still had the power of the savior, even though I couldn't speak or hear. The big man pulled the trigger. Clang! The bullet hit my fluffy wool, but it made the sound of metal slamming into metal. The round bounced right off and didn't even mess up my hair. The whole place went silent. I stepped forward and gently rammed my sheep head into the man's stomach. It wasn't hard, but his whole body went flying. It sank into an ice wall meters away. The survivors dropped to their knees in the snow, and I turned around. I looked toward the legendary geothermal core. It was the world's only hope, but a pack of mutant snow beasts had seized it. I flicked my tail, telling them to follow. From today on, I was the one leading this world. A strange sight appeared on the snowy plain. Hundreds of survivors formed a long line, closely following a glowing pale golden sheep. The storm raged, but within my light, the blizzard felt like a gentle spring breeze. I could sense the killing intent lurking in the snowy mountains. Those mutant snow beasts were watching us like predators, but I had no time to waste. Every extra second in the snow meant ordinary people were one step closer to death. A frail girl couldn't walk. She sat in the snow, face red. I knew it was false heat from hypothermia. I stopped and lowered my head. Since waking, I discovered I had a special ability. My wool could shed at will, and after leaving me, it could stay hot for 12 hours. I gave a shake, and a glowing tuft of wool fell into the girl's arms. She hugged it, and that warmth instantly brought life back to her eyes. The people looked on with envy and awe. I kept moving, even though I couldn't hear cheers or praise. I could see the fire of hope in their eyes. At last, that massive dome-shaped geothermal station appeared at the edge of the horizon. But blocking the doorway were thousands of mutated snow apes, their bodies covered in icy spikes. They roared. I couldn't hear them, but I could feel the ground shaking. I stood at the front, my horns flashing in the freezing wind. The battle erupted instantly. The snow apes surged in like a wave. The survivors shrank back in terror, but there was nowhere to run. I lowered my head and gathered my strength. Then I slammed into the horde like a burning meteor. It felt strange. I didn't have the panda's brute force, or the sloth's agility. But with the system's boost, a ram's charge became a terrifying piercing strike. Any snow ape touched by my horns burst into flames and turned to ash. I was the only source of fire in this frozen world. I carved a bloody path out for survivors. Once we got inside the geothermal station, I found that the core furnace had already gone out, and its outer shell was covered in cracks. Deadly cold kept pouring in through them without end. The engineers shook their heads in despair. Without fuel, the core furnace couldn't restart. This outpost was a giant coffin. I walked up to the furnace. I knew the system left me little time. This world's instance moved at a brutal pace. I turned back and looked on those hopeful faces. Then at the old man who had taken care of me this whole time. I closed my eyes and activated the ultimate sacrifice mode this stage. System, strip away all my wool and turn it into eternal fuel. Warning, without wool protection, the host will be exposed to -100 degrees. Life functions will cease instantly. Execute. Golden light flooded the entire geothermal station. As everyone watched in shock, the pale golden wool on my body started growing fast. Then it fell off like a blizzard, pouring wildly into the core furnace. The frozen furnace core instantly burst with a sun-like red glow. The station's heating system came back to life, and the pipes gave cheerful whistles. I turned back into a bald, scrawny little sheep. That brutal cold sank into my bones. I felt my body grow lighter, mine drifting away. The old man rushed over, trying to take off clothes to cover me, but he grabbed nothing. My body was turning into tiny points of starlight, fading into the warm air. Before I vanished completely, I saw the people who had narrowly escaped death gathering in the center of the station. They did not cheer. Instead, silently knelt toward where I disappeared. On the wall, someone quickly drew a symbol in charcoal. Smiling sheep in the fire. Instance complete. Host save frozen world. After effects recovered. Reward obtained. Power of 10,000 beasts. Next unit preview. Earthquake ruins. Form. Groundhog. When I opened my eyes again, sound returned. It was the sound of the earth splitting apart. Boom! I sprang up and found that I had turned into a round, squeezable groundhog, and moreover, I stood on a high slope, facing the collapsing city below, when my throat suddenly itched. Before I could react, my body had already made the choice for me. I opened my mouth and let out the scream that would go down in history. Ah! Ah! Standing atop the towering ruins, I screamed at the collapsing city below, a cry that pierced the sky. The marmot body was round and chubby, but its vocal cords were like a boosted high-frequency speaker. The survivors running for their lives all froze. They looked up at this marmot standing on the rubble, wearing a dead serious face, almost tragic. Eyes full of disbelief. What is that rat doing? Did it go stupid from fear? Someone shouted, but I had no time to care. My brain was rapidly processing the data through the sound waves. It was a special kind of pulse sensing. Through the scream, I could see the signs of life buried deep underground like radar. The earth was still shaking, beneath the ruins of this city known as Rift Valley City. Thousands of teachers and students were trapped in air raid shelter 10 meters underground. Oxygen was running out, and above them were tons of reinforced concrete. I locked onto location. Dropping to all fours, I shot down the ruins like a streak of gray lightning. When my front paws touched the ground, they turned into hard alloy. Move! Even though all I let out were short little cries, the sheer force of it made the packed crowd part on its own. I went for the weakest spot on the ground and started digging fast. I was digging at insane speed. My marmot instincts were maxed out. My paws blurred through dirt and rubble, and in just a few minutes, I had carved out a slanted tunnel wide enough for an adult to crawl through. The rescue team staring nearby was stunned. They had thought I was just some mutated little animal, but when I precisely dug out a corner of the trapped girl's clothing, everyone rushed to help. It's saving people. It knows we're there, the rescue captain shouted excitedly. I didn't stop. My energy was draining fast, and a marmot's metabolism is very high, so I had to keep searching for buried emergency rations in the wreckage. What was funny was that when I skillfully tore open a pack of compressed biscuits right in front of everyone and stuffed them into my cheek pouches, the tense rescue scene actually softened for a second. So cute. The little girl I dug out first grabbed my tail tightly, her eyes full of trust. I didn't have time to enjoy being adored. From deep underground came an extremely faint sound of structural cracking, a sign of a second collapse. I stood up again and faced the rescue workers, who hadn't reacted yet. It let out sharp, frantic cries, both paws flailing. No one paid attention to my warning. The rescue workers were busy pulling people out. They thought the disaster had eased. The aftershock had passed an hour ago. What's wrong with that groundhog? Why does it keep screaming? I was anxious and wanted to curse, but could only make squeaking sounds. Seeing they refused to leave the danger zone, I narrowed my eyes and charged to the rescue captain's feet, sinking teeth into his pant leg and dragging him toward open ground. Ow! Has this little thing gone crazy? The captain tried to shake me off, but I refused to let go, just as I dragged him within 30 feet of the rubble. The ground heaved again. Boom! The rescue entrance collapsed instantly, and a massive cloud of dust shot up several stories high. If they left 5 seconds later, the rescue team would have been buried alive. Silence fell over the scene. Everyone turned to the huge pit, cold sweat on their backs. The rescue captain stared at me blankly, then suddenly pulled me into his arms, his eyes red. You're a prophet. You're a god sent by heaven to save us. He lifted me over his head. The people who had escaped death all bowed. I was panting, my paws clasped at my chest out of habit. I knew this was the beginning. The real challenge was in the heart of the city. Beneath the research center lay the gene bank of all human civilization. The last group of top scientists was trapped too. I led the rescue team through the maze-like ruins. Whenever a passage collapsed ahead, I could sense it early and find a hidden safe way through. I was like a tiny tank clearing the path, with a long rescue line behind me. But I could feel it. Someone was watching me in the dark. It was the base's villain group, the Falcons. They believed a spirit pet like me, able to predict earthquakes, was extremely valuable for research. As I was about to open the last escape route, the cold barrel of a tranquilizer gun aimed at my neck. Something this good is wasted on a rescue team. A chilling male voice said. A bullet ripped through the air. I may be a marmot, but I carry the soul of a savior. The instant the bullet was about to hit me, I curled up at lightning speed and used my round body to roll across the ground. The tranquilizer dart slammed into an iron plate. I turned and stared coldly at uninvited intruders. I opened my mouth and let out the most earth-shaking cry of my life. That cry was not for rescue, but for intimidation. High-frequency sound waves echoed through the enclosed ruins, and the mercenaries felt their eardrums sting as weapons dropped from their hands. The rescue was in its final moments. I had dug open the door to the gene vault. The scientists weakly crawled out of the tunnel, clutching heavy metal cases. But at that moment, the city's load-bearing walls reached their limit. Run! It's all about to collapse, the rescue captain roared. People surged wildly toward the exit, but the last old professor tripped on the rubble. A massive support beam was about to crash down from above, so I charged over. I didn't use my claws, I braced the falling boulder with my back. The marmot's bones creaked. I could feel my organs being crushed. Go! I let out a soft, gentle growl at the old professor. The professor froze. He looked at the little creature bleeding to save him, tears streaming down. Gritting his teeth, he crawled out. The moment he stepped out of danger, he turned back, pulling me. I looked at the rescued people by the exit, at the lights coming back on. My mission was complete. Facing tearful people, I straightened up. I tucked away my claws, pressed my two paws together, and raised them to my forehead. It was a perfect human salute. Then the boulder came crashing down, and the dust swallowed everything. Instance complete. Host saved Rift City. Faith value exceeded limit. Next stage starting early. Heat. Sand whipped with the stench of blood. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a dark red wasteland. The air reeked of rot. The stench unique to zombies. I was no longer around Little Marmot. I could feel explosive power in my limbs, and a long mane whipping in the wind. I looked at my reflection in a puddle by my feet. It was a majestic male lion. Only, I have a deep scar over my left eye, a battle-damaged metal left by the system. In this world, humanity has already retreated behind towering walls. Outside them, zombie hordes cover the land in the thousands. And I was standing among the corpses of mutated beasts. I am the beast king of this world, and zombies' only nemesis. On a distant hillside, a girl in a worn white dress was being attacked by over a dozen mutant dogs. She held a walking stick, and thick bandages covered her eyes. She was blind. She couldn't see and seemed unable to hear. She just quietly waved the stick, as if waiting for death. I stepped forward and let out the world's first lion's roar. With that roar, all beasts submitted, and even the zombies froze for 3 seconds. I charged into a pack of mutant dogs. A lion needs no flashy moves to fight. One pounce, one bite, one sweep, and mutant dogs that made soldiers tremble seemed as fragile as paper before me. But I did not kill them. I drove them away with pressure. I walked up to the blind girl. She felt the huge shadow fall over her, and trembled violently. The stick slipped from her hand. Is it a lion? She asked softly, her voice sweet yet full of death wish. I said nothing, lowered my head. With my rough tongue, I gently licked wounded hands. The sea otter's gentleness, the panda's simple warmth, and the sheep's body heat had all become the lion's protection. The blind girl froze. Trembling, she reached out and touched my thick mane. Her tears seeped through the bandages. You smell like a god. She wrapped her arms around my neck and burst into tears. In this brutal end times, a blind girl and a fierce one-eyed lion became the strangest yet warmest sight on the wasteland. I knew it. The end of this trial was in that lonely city surrounded by zombies. Carrying the blind girl piggyback, I walked through zombie-filled streets. Everywhere, those mindless zombies acted as if they'd seen a natural enemy and automatically parted for a 3-meter wide path. The soul of 10,000 beasts, and he gave off a cleansing aura, the power rotten life feared most. Big lion. Where are you taking me? Blind girl lay on my back and asked softly. I couldn't answer, but I could feel. The defenses of the steel city ahead were on the verge of collapse. Tens of thousands of zombies were slamming into the gates like mad. The soldiers on the walls had run out of ammo and food. I stopped. I motioned for the blind girl to sit behind a tree, then walked toward the mass of dark figures. The zombie horde took my taunt. With furious roars, they turned and surged at me like a tidal wave. I took a deep breath and slammed my front paws into the ground. Roar! This time, this wasn't an ordinary roar. A visible ring of golden red ripples spread out and swept across the entire city in an instant. The thousands of zombies charging in front vanished into black smoke the moment the ripples touched them. The soldiers on the wall were stunned. They stared at the golden maned figure through the horde, unstoppable, as if a god had descended. The gates of Lone City slowly opened. The soldiers didn't dare come out. They didn't know whether I was friend or foe. Carrying the blind girl on my back, I walked into the city under everyone's gaze. The blind girl felt the dried blood in my mane and whispered, Big lion, are you hurt? I shook my head. This blood belongs to the monsters. The city lord, a seasoned soldier, watched me cautiously, but he quickly realized that wherever I went, the wounded soldier's injuries were slowly healing. That was the hidden trait of the savior form, the field of life. I took blind girl to the city orphanage. Before I left, she clutched my mane tightly and wouldn't let go. Will you stay? I lowered my head and nudged her forehead with my nose, then turned and left without hesitation. My mission wasn't over. There are millions of zombies outside the city. If we don't take down that zombie king, the city will become a graveyard sooner or later. But I know this. The blind girl has memorized my scent. She'll paint my face in her mind. That light will keep her alive. I returned to the wasteland. Under the moonlight, a man in a suit, deathly pale, with red light flickering in his eyes, stood on the hill, watching me. That was the zombie king. He was highly intelligent, and could even control the zombie horde with his mind. Mason Chin, he suddenly said. And it was a human voice. I froze. Since entering this world, this was the first time an NPC had called my name. You can't save everyone, the zombie king sneered. Every time you save a world, the energy in you drains a little more. When you save 99 worlds, you'll vanish completely. Is it worth it? I stepped forward, without hesitation in my eyes. The one-eyed lion looked even more sacred in the moonlight. What's worth it isn't for a rotten monster like you to decide. I let out a low growl. And phantom forms of a panda, a sea otter, a sheep, and a marmot began to appear around me. The power of 5 forms started to merge at this moment. This was the final battle of my lion arc, and the ticket to endgame. The zombie king transformed into a giant ball of flesh with tentacles. On this blood-red wasteland, we unleashed a clash powerful enough to shatter mountains and rivers. It was like countless collapsing apocalypses. Floods, deep freeze, earthquakes, zombies, all the disasters overlapped in that moment in a bizarre way. System. Is this final stage? Asked calmly. System core logic damage detected. Current mode, final defense mechanism. The host will activate final transformation. Once the energy is depleted, that ability will disappear forever. I felt my body swell again. I didn't turn into a lion or a sea otter. I became the original giant panda again. But I knew this was no longer that chubby ball that only ate iron. A starlight glow flowed through my black and white fur. I am the ultimate form of disaster devourer. On the distant horizon, a dark violet meteor big enough to destroy a galaxy was slowly descending. It was the embodiment of the evil thoughts of every world. I sat atop an abandoned skyscraper and picked up a twisted steel bar. Since this is the last time, then I might as well eat my fill. I looked at the meteor. If it fell, the survivors of 99 worlds would be reduced to ashes. I let out a roar and kicked into the air, like a meteor flying in reverse, shooting into the sky. To the survivors of all worlds. The sky split open with a golden tear. I returned to colossal true form. The giant golden panda phantom spread its arms wide. I braced against that falling dark purple meteor with all I had. The pressure was so terrifying my bones started cracking under the strain. Give it to me. I opened my mouth, not to roar, but to devour it like a madman. The evil energy pouring from the meteor was forced into my body. It felt like swallowing millions of red-hot iron bars. The pain was tearing my soul apart, but I couldn't let go. I saw overlapping visions, sea praying at dawn base, a man singing on a wooden plank, the blind girl waiting on the wasteland. If I stepped back even once, they would vanish for good. I roared and bit straight through the core of the whole meteor. Golden light exploded across the void. And I felt the system breaking apart inch by inch. Warning, transformation ability depleted. System uninstalling. Host about to fall. I closed eyes. In the last second before mine went dark, I saw a dark purple meteor turn into a sky full of golden rain, spilling over every dry, frozen, shattered world. When I opened my eyes, I didn't hear the system's electronic voice. I was lying on soft grass. A breeze drifted by with the scent of flowers. I sat up and looked at my hands, long, strong. It was human skin, without black and white fur or lion's mane. I had turned back into Chinemo. That original human. I tried to sense the system within me, but there was only emptiness. I couldn't transform again. But then I realized, even though I lost my power, I was given a strange gift. I could walk between fragments of time and space. I was no longer a savior, but a passing observer. Got to my feet and brushed the grass off my clothes. I decided to go back and visit those worlds. I wanted to know, after I left, whether the people I saved were doing well. I took a deep breath and stepped toward a blue-glowing rift in time and space. That was my first stop, the world once drowned by the flood. The sound of the waves was still gentle, but the air no longer smelled of salty decay. I walked down a wide marble street. This place had once been a vast ocean, but now it had become a magnificent city on the sea. In the central square of the city stood a giant statue. I walked closer and saw a sea sloth clutching a stone in one hand, with claws covering its eyes. The statue looked vividly alive, with a clumsy kind of protective warmth. That's our guardian god, a passing little boy said as he looked at the statue, his eyes full of wonder. Is he powerful? I asked. Of course. The boy puffed out his chest. He saved our ancestors from a 10,000-meter tsunami. Sea sloths are everywhere, on our flags, on our coins. Grandma says that God was just too shy, so he took such a cute form. I smiled. I saw the city flags waving in the wind, each one bearing the image of a face-covering sea otter. Just then, I noticed a white-haired old woman sitting on a bench. She was holding a violin with a missing string in arms. It was Amon. She had already become a legend in this city, though Amon was old. Her eyes were still clear. I went over and sat beside her. She turned her head, her cloudy eyes studying me. After a while, she trembled slightly and pulled a yellowed sheet of drawing paper from her arms. She had drawn it. The sea otter in the picture tilted its head at her, holding a fresh fish in its paws. "Young man, you look like someone I once knew," she said, her voice hoarse. "Someone you knew?" My heart gave a jolt. That was years ago. Back then, the world was falling apart, and he kept me alive. Amon stroked the portrait. Everyone said he was a god, but I knew that beneath that thick fur lived a very gentle human soul. She handed me a small gift box. I opened it and saw a smooth, clear pebble. "This is what he left behind," he said. "When sunlight shines through this stone, you'll see his smiling face." I clenched the stone. Sunlight poured down, and the shadow it cast in my palm looked just like a sea otter washing its face. I bowed deeply to Amon, then walked toward the next rift. The second world. No longer a forbidden zone of -100 degrees. The geothermal station had become a massive power hub, and the whole city was covered by a greenhouse dome. I saw people on the streets wearing pale gold uniforms, with a delicate little sheep pin on the collar. It was the highest honor medal. "Welcome to St. Lam's City." A soldier stopped me. When he saw the stone Amon had given me, his expression turned respectful. "Are you a pilgrim from afar?" "I want to see the place's history," I said. He led me into the museum. In the center of the hall was a glowing mass of wool. And even after hundreds of years, it still gave off steady warmth. Legend says the lead sheep sacrificed all its wool to ignite the geothermal fire, the soldier said softly. Since then, the warmest clothes must always be saved for the weakest children. The mercy the holy sheep taught us. I walked along the warm streets. I saw children gathered around a white sheep, feeding it fresh grass. In this world, every animal was treated with great kindness, because they believed the gods took the form of these fluffy creatures and come down to earth at any moment. The third world, the Rift Valley city that once collapsed, had become a cyber-style underground new city. The buildings here were sturdy, and geological monitors were everywhere. I walked toward the city gate. I saw a huge graffiti wall. On it was a marmot standing straight and saluting. Its eyes were firm, with collapsing boulders behind. "That's the Eternal Sentinel." A young man walked over and set down compressed biscuits at the foot of the wall. "It's a tradition. Every day, people offer tasty food to the Sentinel." I heard from the elders he could dig faster than a laser drill. The young man smiled. "Without him, our gene vault would have turned to ash long ago." I reached out and gently touched the graffiti. I remembered that suffocating afternoon, and the support beam pressing on my back. The city no longer needs me to hold it up. They learned to reinforce their home themselves. As I left, I heard a crisp marmot call from the city broadcast. It was their hourly time signal. That cry was no longer a warning of disaster, but a sign of peace. I reached the final world. The former zombie wasteland was now covered with grass. The high walls were torn down, and people built estates on the former battlefield. I found the old orphanage. It had now become a grand orphanage, and sitting at the entrance was a woman no longer young, though she had entered middle age. But her eyes were still in that familiar bandage. It was the blind girl. No soldiers guarded her, only small animals around her. Deer, rabbits, and even a few mutant dogs that were no longer savage. She seemed to sense my arrival, and her calm face began to stir. "Is that you?" she asked, trembling. I stopped 3 steps away from her. I was no longer that majestic one-eyed lion. But she recognized the aura on me, across 99 worlds. "Is it the great lion?" She stood up and fell forward. I took her hand. She touched my palm. Human warmth, not a lion's, human strength. The blind girl smiled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. "Everyone's been waiting for your return." She tightened her grip on my hand. "Not just me, but also the descendants of Sui, and the heirs of Aman. We built a hall to hold all the memories of you." She led me deeper into the forest. In front of a towering mountain range stood a pure white building. It had no lavish decorations, yet it carried a sacred calm that put people at ease. "The Hall of Beasts." Those words were carved above the entrance. Everyone entering had to leave behind a gift for kindness. The blind girl pushed open the door. In that moment, my body froze. The walls of the great hall were covered with portraits and photographs. I saw the sea otter covering its face in the tsunami, the sheep whose wool burst open in the blizzard, the marmot standing on top of the ruins, screaming like mad, the lion charging alone into a tide of corpses, and that giant panda hugging a lamppost, its face covered in ash as it ate. I walked slowly. Every picture was a world's gratitude. In front of one display case, saw a heavy machine gun barrel bent out of shape by bites. "So you left that behind." The plaque beside it read, "A god once came. He took away rage and left behind peace. He ate steel, so that we could have softer hearts." In another display case, I saw man's stone. I saw the blind girl's walking stick she donated. People have always wondered what God looks like. Standing beside me, she said softly. Some say you're light, some say you're thunder, but more people believe you were just too shy, so you became these fluffy forms. So that when we were in despair, we'd dare hold you. My nose stung. As a savior, I had traveled through many centuries. And I had never thought about leaving my name behind. I thought I was a passerby, someone carrying out a mission, but I never realized that on the ruins I had redeemed, people built me a temple with pure love, one that needed no incense. The blind girl led me to the deepest part of the hall. There was a thick book there, with 99 animal emblems set into the cover. This is the divine bestiary. The blind girl ran her hand over the cover. We collected the legends of every surviving world. Every page is one of your forms. She opened book. The first page showed a giant panda. The artist drew its round body and black-rimmed eyes full of reason. The second page was a sea otter. The third page was a sheep. Every blank space on each page was packed with dense signatures, left by billions of survivors, all praying for me. But the last page was blank. Write your own name and bless me. But then the blind girl stopped and turned to look at me. Because no one has ever seen what the divine truly looks like. Everyone says the last page should be saved for the truest soul. She handed me a pen. I looked at the blank final page, the tip trembling in my hand. I wanted to draw Carson ink, but after a moment, I only drew a smiling face on the paper. It doesn't matter what the divine looks like. What matters is that you are smiling now. The blind girl led me out of the great hall. The sun was setting on the horizon. The entire hall of beasts was washed in brilliant gold and red. I suddenly saw familiar figures on the lawn outside the hall. A little girl with twin ponytails ran past, hugging a panda doll. She really looks like Sue. A young doctor with a medical bag was bandaging an injured puppy, and his eyes looked just like that old man from the geothermal station. An elderly woman in a wheelchair was playing a gentle tune on her violin. It was Amon's melody. I realized that even though those people from the past were gone, their spirits, their kindness, still lived on in this new world. What I saved wasn't cold, lifeless worlds, but seeds that would never stop burning. The blind girl let go of my hand. She sensed I was about to leave. Chinimo, will you come back? I looked at the peaceful land. After 99 journeys, at this moment, I found the meaning of going home. I will, I said softly. As long as this world still needs warmth, I'll always be here. I stepped into the void. This time, no white light, only drifting fireflies. Final system announcement. The silent electronic voice rang out in mine. No longer cold, but carrying relieved lightness. Host Chinimo, your 99 world-saving missions have been successfully completed. The system's true nature. It was not an alien creation, but the energy formed from the final distress signal sent out by dying civilizations at the very end. I froze. So the power that let me transform was never some random cheat ability out of nowhere, but the will to live from all those lives. You were never savior. You were civilization's last trump card. And now, that card has been played. The world has saved itself. System uninstall complete. Ethan Cole. Have a nice life. The fireflies faded away. I opened my eyes and was standing at a busy city intersection. Traffic flowed endlessly. Neon lights flickered. People hurried past, and no one knew this world had come to the brink of destruction 99 times. I looked down at my hands. A thin layer of calluses covered my palms, metals from gripping stones, tearing vines, and carrying boulders. I walked into a pet shop. A young clerk was giving a little sea otter a bath. The otter squirmed non-stop, covering its eyes tightly with its tiny paws. The clerk smiled and said, "Look how shy this little guy is. Doesn't it remind you of that god from the popular legend of beasts?" I looked at the little sea otter and couldn't help laughing. Yeah, it really does. I walked out of the shop and looked up at the giant screen on the mall, where a public service ad was playing. The star of the ad was a chubby panda, adorably munching on bamboo. The caption read, "Protect nature, protect our only home." I walked through the crowd, feeling freedom I'd never known before. I no longer had to bleed from every orifice to save people, or burn through my life to gain power. I bought a cup of hot coffee, feeling the warmth through the cup in my hands. That gentle warmth was what I wanted most to hold after saving the world 99 times. By the roadside, a boy fell down. He didn't cry. He bravely got back up and brushed the dust off the knees. I walked past him and blew on the wound. It was a faint trace of divine power, too weak to transform, but enough to stop the pain. I returned to my rented room. Simple, but cozy. There were no grand portraits on the wall, only a photo with my old classmates. I walked to the bathroom mirror, wanting to see what I, ink black, had become after 99 worlds. The man in the mirror had delicate features, but his eyes showed depth far beyond his age. The corners of my mouth lifted slightly, hinting at relief. I remembered what the blind girl said, leave the last page for the truest soul. I raised both hands toward the mirror. I didn't transform, but I covered my face like a sea otter, tilted my head like a panda, and finally, like a lion. I narrowed one eye. I said to my reflection, "You've worked hard." Outside the window, moonlight spilled into the room. In the mirror, I saw behind me a group of shadowy figures standing. The panda patted my shoulder, the sea otter rolled at my feet, the sheep leaned against my knees. And the marmots saluted me, smiled at each other. Many years later, on the summit of an unnamed mountain, stood a small art studio. An old painter was telling children a story. On every page of the picture book in his hands was a different animal. Grandpa. Did these animals exist? A girl asked, looking up at him. The painter gently patted her head, his eyes soft. Of course. Whenever the world grows dark, they appear. They might be a panda, a sea otter, or maybe just an ordinary person beside you. The painter turned to the book's last page. It was no longer blank. The back of a man in a trench coat was on it, walking into the light toward the distance. Around him followed 99 little animals. In the lower right corner of the page, a line read, "He never appeared in human form." But all of humanity remembered his warmth. Below the mountain, the city was glowing, peaceful and thriving. The wind flipped the book open to a mirror-like card. Every child who looked at the book could see their own face in that mirror. So, we can be gods too? The children said excitedly. On the mountain path in the distance, a man in a sun hat strolled away with a drawing board on his back. Hearing the children's voices, he smiled with quiet relief.